to Friday evening. And then Saturday sees a similar kind of day with showers for the northwest, drier and brighter elsewhere, but still very breezy.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, this afternoon on GB News. Here's what's coming up this hour. The Prime Minister set out his cost of living plan earlier today in a speech in Blackpool. But did it go far enough? And will it help ease the pressure on his premiership? We'll be getting reaction to this from Blackpool. And with the fighting intensifying in the east of Ukraine, we'll be going live to speak with the former Ukrainian President, Petro Poroshenko. And as the first migrants are set to be removed to Rwanda next week, unless that is scuppered, we will be looking at the plans from activist groups looking to block those very deportations. And of course, give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me @gbnews. We've got all of this and so much more coming up over the next hour.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 3. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has confirmed plans to extend the right to buy scheme for housing association tenants. The government's also pledged to build a new social home for everyone sold. During a speech in Blackpool, Boris Johnson said 2.5 million households that belong to associations have left people trapped because they can't buy. He argued £30 billion in housing benefit that currently goes towards rent could help people secure and pay for mortgages. Boris Johnson says it's time to unbolt the door to ownership.
We will finish the right to own reforms Margaret Thatcher began in the 1980s. Ending the absurd position where first-time buyers spend their life savings on flats only to find themselves being charged hundreds of pounds for painting their own doors or even unable to own a dog. That's what being on your side is all about.
Well, speaking earlier, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said he doesn't believe the new measures will be effective.
The announcement today from the Prime Minister is the wrong approach. It is a reheated version of an idea that the government had back in 2015. They piloted it, it didn't work. And if ever you needed evidence that this divided government is completely out of ideas, it's this announcement today, which is simply reheating an old idea. They piloted it, it didn't work. They really are at the end of the road.
And more travel chaos is set to come on Britain's rail services. Drivers from 3 more train companies will go on strike later this month in separate disputes over pay. The ASLEF union has confirmed that drivers at Hull Trains, Great Anglia and Croydon Tramlink have all voted to take industrial action. That's on top of planned strikes by members of the RMT union, which will go ahead on the 21st, 23rd and 25th of this month. The government says it will carefully consider an independent review into smoking, which recommends under-18s should never be able to legally buy tobacco. It suggests the legal age in England should be raised from 18 by 1 year every year until no one can buy them. The report also says tobacco firms should be forced to pay a polluter tax to help smokers quit. It's estimated there are currently 7 million smokers across the UK. Simon Clark, director of smokers' rights group Forest, told GB News it's about freedom of choice.
The message of today's report, should it be adopted by government, which I hope it won't be, is that England is no longer a liberal or tolerant society. And we're living in a world where adults can increasingly expect to be infantilized with all these rules and regulations dictating how they live their lives. Smoking rates will continue to fall over the next decade, but it doesn't need the government to intervene like this because it will happen naturally.
The average price of filling up a typical family car has passed £100 for the first time. The RAC says it's a truly dark day for drivers, with the average price for a litre of petrol reaching a record 182 pence, diesels at a record 188 pence. It's after the biggest daily jump in petrol prices for 17 years. Senior Environmental Research Fellow at Imperial College, Malcolm Grimson, told GB News it's not just the war in Ukraine that's pushing prices up, but also the after effects of the pandemic.
The COVID crisis hit, oil prices collapsed. It's difficult to remember now, but there were tankers full of oil floating around the world, desperate to find someone to take the oil and actually prepared to pay people. Oil had a negative value. So the world stopped producing oil, largely speaking. The economy rebounded, and now you've got supply significantly outstripping demand pretty much everywhere.
Thousands of customers were provided an unacceptable service by electricity networks following Storm Arwen. A review by energy watchdog Ofgem found many households were without power for more than 10 days. Some complained of poor communication from their suppliers about when they'd be reconnected. The storm, which carried winds of up to 100 miles per hour, left nearly 1 million homes in Britain without power in November last year. Some breaking news. Local Russian media is reporting that 2 British fighters have been sentenced to death. Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner appeared in court accused of several offences, including training in order to carry out terrorist activities. This is a developing story and we'll bring you more as we get it. The number of deaths involving COVID-19 in England and Wales have dropped to the lowest level since last summer. The Office for National Statistics reports that 410 death certificates mentioned coronavirus in the last week of May. That's the lowest number since July 2021. It's the 4th week in a row that the figures have gone down. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, let's return to Tom with the briefing.
Hello and welcome to your afternoon dose of the briefing here from 3 p.m. through to 4 p.m. to keep you up to date with everything you need to know about the political world this afternoon. Well, in the last hour, the Prime Minister has been speaking in Blackpool. His cost of living speech took on many issues. Here is the breakdown of some of the biggest moments of his speech. The Prime Minister said the government cannot respond to rising inflation by paying people more. He stressed that even though the war in Ukraine has driven up prices, abandoning Ukraine would be morally repugnant. And sounding more conservative, the Prime Minister said the current level of taxation burden is an aberration. And finally, he said that tariffs on food imports should be cut to ease that cost of living. Well, joining me now live from Blackpool is GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey. And Darren, I have to say I very much enjoyed your questions to the Prime Minister this afternoon, focusing on the issues that matter to people across the country. You asked him about housing and about fuel. What did you make of his responses?
Yeah, indeed, Tom. Just on the speech as a whole, it was very, very wide-ranging. We were told it was going to be kind of focused on primarily housing, but he touched on everything from olive oil being imported from Turkey through, as you say, to the war with Ukraine and fuel duty. It felt much more, in some ways, like a conference speech than it did a speech specifically on housing, but clearly this was an attempt to reset his leadership following that vote on Monday. I think, interestingly, on housing, clearly the government have come out with this announcement today trying to allow people who live in housing associations the right to buy the home. It is an attempt to try and address some of the particular details and difficulties they face. For example, it is impossible at the moment to do that, impossible also to make some substantial changes. Prime Minister was clearly trying to link back, wasn't he, to the right to buy scheme launched by Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. He'd made reference to that. But my question was primarily focused on this issue of supply, because at the heart of all the difficulties around housing in this country is the very fact that we're simply just not building enough houses, and we've not been building enough houses for a very long period of time. Now, this government set a manifesto pledge of building 300,000 houses per year by the middle of this decade. It was an attempt to try and address that, though experts say even building 300,000, Tom, is simply standing still given our population growth. But the Prime Minister essentially has dumped that pledge now entirely. He said that he could not give a cast-iron guarantee that that pledge would be met. And so that again feeds into this narrative that if the government wants to build affordable homes, whether they're for people who live in council houses or housing associations, or whether they live in rented accommodation, frankly, the only way properly to do that is to actually have enough supply. And that, frankly, does not look like it's going to be addressed anytime soon. And that means for many, the housing crisis is only likely to continue.
Yes, it's such an interesting issue because, of course, the government did have plans to massively liberalise the planning system to build many more houses. They were plans put forward by Robert Jenrick, the former Communities and Housing Secretary, and they seemed to be ditched, dumped, thrown in the bin as soon as the Liberal Democrats won the Chesham and Amersham by-election. I suppose the tightrope that the Prime Minister has to walk here is, on the one hand, he's going to not have a growing base of Conservative home-owning voters if he doesn't build houses, but if he does build houses, those who currently live in them might switch to vote for other parties.
Yeah, indeed, and that is the problem, and that is why, and it's not just a problem who's faced this government, let's be honest about it, it's a problem that's faced, I think, primarily Conservative governments over the last couple of decades. And you're right, it's a more immediate concern about trying to keep local communities, NIMBYism if you like, happy, particularly in the home counties and elsewhere, simply to not lose their support. But you're also right in suggesting there is a risk that actually there's a growing frustration of young people who feel that they cannot get on the property ladder, and they're blaming, frankly, the government for that, and possibly, in the end, far less likely to vote Conservative. But it is really fascinating where the Prime Minister is at the moment, Tom, in the sense that he is having to try and deal with the complexities of a really, really difficult political process, while also having to deal with lots of the internal politics of the Conservative Party. We heard time and time again from the Prime Minister today about taxation, about how he wants to bring down taxes, how, as you say, he quoted that it was an aberration, the amount of tax. He even recognised that the burden of taxation post-pandemic is at a 70-year high. But frankly, for lots of Conservative MPs, they've heard this before. They've heard Rishi Sunak and the Prime Minister talk about how taxes are too high, and yet there's not been to date really substantial cuts, at least from their point of view. Yes, there have been changes to the national insurance rise that we face, but not substantial cuts. And there were questions today about whether that cut that's been promised next year in income tax could be brought forward to this year and maybe doubled from 1 to 2 pence. The Prime Minister would not be drawn on that. And I think there will be frustration going forward. And I asked the question about fuel duty as well, whether the government was going to go further on that. But there will be frustration, I think, amongst Conservative MPs that, yes, they're hearing the right things now, they think, from the Prime Minister on taxation. But will he deliver it? Will he actually follow through and cut those taxes?
It's a big political question for him, and he might not have that much time to answer it. I suppose Conservative MPs will be expecting action more than words rather soon. We'll keep our ears pressed to the ground, no doubt. But Darren, thanks so much for bringing us the latest there from Blackpool as the Prime Minister was delivering that wide-ranging speech. Well, now, for more on the housing aspect of the PM's big speech today, let's speak to GB News presenter and reporter Rosie Wright, who is at an estate agent's in South London. Now, Rosie, you've been talking about the potential policy that the Prime Minister may have announced all day. Did his speech live up to your expectations?
Well, lots of young professionals living in South London who pay huge amounts for their rent every single month but can't save for a deposit, they certainly would have been listening, and the Prime Minister directly addressed them. Let's go back to his acknowledgement, first of all, of two key problems. We don't have enough houses, and for those people who want to buy them, they just can't get the deposit together. Well, point number one, he kept on saying, we're on your side. He said the issue here is not about having a lack of space. No, there is space. There's publicly owned brownfield sites which we will build on. He said when we do build those, priority will go to first-time buyers and key workers. But can those key workers actually then afford the property? Well, another acknowledgement from the Prime Minister. He said, I used the term, it was ludicrous that people were spending so much on their rent and then they couldn't save enough money for their deposit. That, of course, being exacerbated by rising inflation, the rising cost of living. And he said it's like continually moving goalposts. You save enough for a deposit, but then you need even more. House prices currently at a record high. Well, he said there's going to be a review of the mortgage, and particularly an increase in those much lower deposit mortgages where you could borrow up to 95% of the value of your home. A lot of this might sound like comforting words, but we haven't actually seen the real detail on how these policies will be enacted. Big changes for people who live in housing association properties if you rent from there. What we had confirmed, which had been preempted before the speech today, was that 4 decades old policy of Margaret Thatcher of the right to buy your council home will be extended to those tenants living in housing association. Second of all, for those of them who have housing benefits, another change. They would be allowed to use the money from that housing benefit to then fund a mortgage. Will this all be enough? The main criticism from the Labour Party is this isn't a new idea. This is an old idea that David Cameron tried to bring forward again in 2015, which then you tried to pilot again in 2019. We haven't seen it executed. And there is a real risk, so say the Labour Party and also some homeless charity campaigners who are saying, well, for all of those people who then buy their social care homes, you promised before that you'd then replace like for like, but that hasn't happened. The government have promised this time that they will do that. If they don't, there is a risk that these policies might make it easier for some people to buy their home, but then for the people who really need social housing, there's less available for them.
Really interesting one to watch, I suppose. Will those houses be replaced? I suppose we'll follow this one very closely indeed. Rosie, thank you so much for joining us and talking through the detail of that policy. Now, the British Chambers of Commerce have said that the UK economic growth will grind to a halt and that 10% inflation is on the way. Of course, only 1% higher than now. This follows another bleak warning this week from the OECD that Britain's growth in 2023 will be the worst of nearly all G20 countries, all except Russia. Well, let's bring in Andrew Lillico, Director of Europe Economics, to talk through the UK's growth potential and indeed what the Prime Minister said today. Andrew, first of all, your reaction to the Prime Minister's speech?
I think it was broadly, very disappointing, really. I think that he needed to offer some new vision in response to the very poor performance that he'd had in the confidence vote, and he didn't really come up with anything. It was a few reheated sound bites about reducing regulation here, and there was some stuff about reducing tariffs on bananas and olive oil, and the main thing was this rather misconceived policy on facilitating higher mortgages for homeowners, which will have three kinds of main effects. That will make it a little bit easier for those people to acquire a house. It will mean that the house prices go up, so it gets more expensive for everybody who's not in that category to have a house. And thirdly, because you're managing higher mortgage lending, that will tend to boost the money supply, and as a consequence of that, we'll see inflation go up a little bit more. So he's made his choice. It wouldn't have been what I'd done.
It's so interesting that he said, he announced those 95% mortgages just minutes after saying you can't borrow your way out of inflation, you can't spend your way out of inflation, and you can't tax your way to growth. Did his words match his actions?
Absolutely not. They were literally talking about helping people to buy houses with your money. Right, so we're going to have benefits pay for people to buy houses, and then there's all this stuff about how the market does things better. But then he was talking as if you have money that goes on rent, then that doesn't facilitate extra house building and so on. Well, why is it any better for people to be buying houses in terms of boosting housing supply than for people to be renting houses? They buy the people who rent out houses, they have them built, and then they rent them out to the poorer people. And that's a perfectly good economic mechanism. It's not clear to me what the government rationale is for paying benefits in order for people to buy houses. That's very strange.
Yes, inflation in other areas too, he touched upon. Because, of course, inflation is running at 9%, expected to go even higher still. He didn't say anything specifically about how that inflation would come down. What would you have him do?
Well, I would have him say what inflation rate he wants to have this year and next year, and say what the consequences would be for the Bank of England if it's not met. I would have thought at this stage we've got to the point at which you say, if you don't meet the 2023 target, then we're going to revoke Bank of England independence and fire the whole MPC. That's probably what I would do at this point. What you would do is you'd pick a rate, and then you would make the rest of policy help achieve that rate. So, for example, you might say, well, we're going to assume that the public sector pay deals are based on our target rate instead of what the rate's going to actually be. You pre-announce what the benefits would be, how much the rail fares are going to go up and so on the basis of the actual rate. You don't do things like having government regulatorily encourage additional bank lending to boost the money stock, exactly the kind of thing that he's done today. You try to make your government all work together to achieve your objective. And they just don't have a target. They don't have an economic policy at all. So the rest of policy can't align with whatever their central inflation goal is because they don't have one.
Oh, it's a bleak picture you've painted there. Let's just hope that some of those backbenchers listen to the rhetoric and push further, because we are expecting further speeches from the Prime Minister in the coming weeks too. This was just the opening gambit, and if he survives in the job, perhaps we'll see some flesh on those bones. But for now, Andrew Lilico, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing. Appreciate your time. Now, coming up, we'll be speaking to former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko live on GB News. But before that, a quick break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that fighting for the city of Severodonetsk may decide the outcome of the war in the east of the country. The focus of the war switched to the east at the end of March after Russian forces pulled back from the region around Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Large parts of the Donbass have been under the control of Russian-backed separatists since the fighting broke out in 2014 and 15, and this comes in the last hour. Russian media is reporting that the British soldiers, which were captured in Ukraine by the Russians, have now been sentenced to death. I'll repeat that the British soldiers, 2 of them, who were captured in Ukraine by the Russians, have now been sentenced to death. Well, joining me now to react to that news and more is the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko. Thank you so much for joining us on the briefing, Mr. Poroshenko. Really appreciate you being here. First of all, can I get your reaction to this news that in what seems to be some sort of show trial, the Russians have condemned 2 Britons to death?
First of all, we have more than 2,500 Ukrainian, several foreigners, including 2 British, which with the weapons in the hands fight for Ukrainian sovereignty, for Ukrainian independence. And this is the barbarian face of Russia. This is just a strong message which the whole world should send to Russia, that Russia has a zero jurisdiction on this territory. This is the Ukrainian soil. This is the Ukrainian state. This is the Ukrainian people who, with the weapons in their hands, protect their own land. And this is an aggressor country with the Russian barbarians who come here to kill Ukrainians. And on behalf of all Ukrainians, as the 5th president of Ukraine, I want to thank all the British people, including those who are now in Ukraine, including those who are voting to support Ukraine, receiving Ukrainian refugees, because this is extremely great symbol of solidarity. And when you are talking about the Severodonetsk, this is the extremely important point, and Ukraine paying now a huge price. Yesterday, I was in Lviv. and we were in the church for funeral of Portman Oleksiy. This is the soldier, Ukrainian soldier who were killed in Svetogorsk. He has 3 children. He has a wife. He has hundreds of people who come to the church to say the farewell. And this is the price Ukraine pay every day, because more than 100 Ukrainian soldiers per day are killed. More than 500 Ukrainian soldiers are wounded per day. And this is extremely important, because the Severodonetsk can become a turning point for deoccupation, at least for Donetsk and Lugansk region. What's happening there? The Putin said that in April, the whole Donbass would be captured by Russian troops. Then he said on the so-called Victory Day, 9th of May, whole Donbass would be, as a great order of the Putin, occupied by Russia. Now he said that before 12th of June, before tomorrow, the so-called Days of Russia, all Donetsk would be occupied by Russia. And only Ukrainian armed forces, which were created in the year 2014 by me as a Supreme Commander-in-Chief of Ukrainian armed forces, and was based on the NATO standard, was equipped with the NATO weapons. And I want to thank for that United Kingdom and United States, because your Gannon, your howitzer is already there, and your ammunition helping us, Ukrainian, to stop Putin. And I want to thank you for helping us to save Europe's security, including British security.
Well, I know that everyone in the United Kingdom feels immensely proud to be standing alongside Ukraine and the Ukrainian people in your fight. But turning now to where you have been this week, Mr. Poroshenko, you have been visiting a conference of the European People's Party. You've been outside of Ukraine and talking to leaders of the European Union. What was your experience in the requests that Ukraine has of the European Union?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm full of impression, because this is my first visit for 105 days of war. 15 weeks, Ukrainian with the weapons in the hands, protecting Ukrainian sovereignty and European security. And I stay here, and from this position to the Russian troops was less than 5 kilometers. And we were under constant shelling of Russian cruise missiles and Russian shelling. And with this situation, we definitely now have a statistics that Russia launched more than 2,600 cruise missiles against Ukraine since the beginning of the war. And now I go to Europe. Why now? Because this is extremely important month for Ukraine. Because on the 23rd of June, it would be the session of the European Union Council, where should be made the historic decision for Ukraine, given to us, voting the decision to give to us the candidate status as a future membership of Ukraine. And I'm proud that me as a president of Ukraine vote and change the constitution, put in the constitution obligatory as an aim for our foreign policy, full membership in EU and NATO. Of course, British people is not the best after Brexit to deliver these messages. But believe me, now Ukrainian has more than 80% of the people support transatlantic and European integration. And I'm very much proud that European People Party on their Congress voted unanimously about support Ukrainian application for the status. And the chairman of our family group, Mr. Manfred Weber, voted in the European Parliament, and European Parliament make a historic decision just yesterday about granting to Ukraine the status. And the Council of Presidents for European Parliament do the same. And on 28th to 30th of June in Madrid, it would be also historic summit of NATO. And with that situation, when Ukraine demonstrate and surprise the world by Ukrainian armed forces, by our unity, by our solidarity with the whole world, we stop Russian troops. And that's why giving to Ukraine the membership action plan as a huge stimulus for reform, for changing, as a have shoulder to shoulder with the NATO troops, Ukrainian armed forces, that would be extremely important and very great decision for the NATO summit.
Certainly, certainly. Well, we wish you well on your journey to accession process of the European Union. But just finally, Petro Poroshenko, I noted that Volodymyr Zelensky on earlier this week said that he was pleased that Boris Johnson won the confidence vote in the House of Commons, that he remained Prime Minister, that he's a strong ally of Ukraine. Is that a view that you share?
Look, I'm a right person to be asked, because I cooperate with Boris Johnson as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, as a Foreign Secretary, and he demonstrates a unique charisma and unique support of my nation, which is already more than 8 years in the war. And we really feel the shoulder of the real friend. We think that Boris Johnson demonstrates a great leadership of the whole Western world, not only of the great British people, to make a breakthrough and to facilitate, supply everything from nutrition to ammunition, and the lethal weapons from the Great Britain play a key role in the first hours of the aggression. And we now have even a poem about the anti-tank missiles in Laos, which is supplied to us with the British people, a British government and Boris Johnson. And we definitely respect the United Kingdom democracy on this voting, but believe me, we are happy. Boris, congratulations.
Well, Petro Poroshenko, former president of Ukraine, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate what you have to say on all of the issues that we've covered there.
It's a pleasure.
Well, coming up, we'll be discussing how the activist groups looking to block deportations to Rwanda are getting on. But first, it's your news update.
It's 3:35. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Local Russian media is reporting that 2 British men accused of being mercenaries for Ukraine have been sentenced to death. Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner appeared in a Russian-backed court in Donetsk, accused of several offences, including training in order to carry out terrorist activities. A Moroccan national has also received the death penalty. Reports say all 3 men will appeal the decision. The Prime Minister has confirmed plans to extend the right to buy scheme to housing association tenants. During a speech in Blackpool, Boris Johnson argued the £30 billion housing benefit, which currently goes towards rent, could help lower-paid workers secure and pay for mortgages. The government's also pledged to build a new social home for everyone sold.
We will finish the right to own reforms Margaret Thatcher began in the 1980s. Ending the absurd position where first-time buyers spend their life savings on flats only to find themselves being charged hundreds of pounds for painting their own doors or even unable to own a dog. That's what being on your side is all about.
Drivers from 3 more train companies are set to go on strike later this month in separate disputes over pay. The ASLEF union confirms that drivers at Hull Trains, Greater Anglia and Croydon Tramlink have all voted to take industrial action. The average price of filling up a typical family car has surpassed £100 for the first time. The RAC says it's a truly dark day for drivers. The average price for a litre of petrol has reached a record 182 pence and diesel is at a record 188 pence. It's after the biggest daily jump in petrol prices for 17 years. And the government says it will carefully consider an independent review into smoking, which recommends under 18s should never be able to legally buy tobacco. It suggests the legal age in England should be raised from 18 by 1 year every year until no one can buy it. The report also says tobacco firms should be forced to pay a polluter tax to help smokers quit. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's today's markets as they stand. The pound is 1.254 to the dollar. It's 1.177 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,470.67 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing. Now, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is visiting Dublin today, where he's meeting with Irish leaders to discuss the Northern Ireland Protocol. The visit comes after the government recently indicated that it will introduce legislation to disapply parts of the international treaty it signed. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Democratic Unionist Party MP Carla Lockhart. Welcome to the programme, Carla. We're hearing that we may not get the legislation that has been promised from the government this week. It may well be a little bit more to wait. The government insist that this legislation will be within international law. The Labour Party seem to be implying that they think the government is about to break international law. What's your assessment of exactly what's going on?
Well, we welcome Sir Keir Starmer's visit today. I do believe he will be visiting Northern Ireland as well. We welcome it. We trust that he listens and that he engages with unionists, because ultimately there is not one unionist party, unionist MLA, unionist MP who supports what the government has done in relation to the protocol and the friction that it has caused between goods coming from GB to Northern Ireland. It is impacting people's lives, it is impacting the cost of goods, and ultimately causing major problems for businesses here in Northern Ireland. Therefore, we want the government to act. I have been briefed on the legislation. My understanding is that it will come next week, and we welcome the fact that we will see legislation on the floor of the House. However, the content, we will await to see what exactly is within it, and we will assess it against our 7 key tests that we outlined in relation to the protocol.
Now, we've been hearing that the most contentious elements of this legislation, what has been disagreed with most, the bits that have potentially kicked the announcement from this week into next week, are particularly over VAT homogeneity across the United Kingdom and the prospect of the European Court of Justice still having purview within Northern Ireland. What's your understanding when it comes to those 2 crucial points, VAT independence for the whole of the United Kingdom and jurisdiction of the ECJ?
Well, ultimately, the protocol must be replaced by arrangements that restore our place within the United Kingdom, and the new arrangements must command the support of unionist politicians and the unionist people across Northern Ireland. There have been difficulties in some of these issues. I'm not at liberty to get into the nuts and bolts and the details of the issues that have arisen throughout the course of the bringing forward of the legislation, but safe to say, this will be tested against our 7 tests. We only have to look at the VAT issue, for instance. And if you look at the cost of living and the fact that the UK government have been able on GB mainland to introduce measures that would assist people with the increasing cost of living. In Northern Ireland, they haven't applied to us because we are still part of the EU VAT regime. That is just unacceptable. We should be able to benefit from any measure that the UK government introduces. So ultimately, all of this will be tested against our 7 tests. We want to see our place restored within the United Kingdom, and we want to see it benefiting the people of Northern Ireland, the businesses of Northern Ireland, and ensuring that there is no friction between East-West trade.
The government continually says that the way that the protocol has been implemented by the European Union severely undermines the Good Friday Agreement. It is weakening the crucial East-West element of that agreement and strengthening the North-South element, thereby losing the community, losing the consent of one of the 2 key communities that signed up to that agreement. Keir Starmer is, of course, in Northern Ireland today. Do you think he shares that view? Do you think he sees the risks to the Good Friday Agreement of the protocol as it's being implemented?
Well, certainly we have made that point too, and we have made it on the floor of the House. I know that my party leader met with Sir Keir Starmer earlier in the week, and it is very clear to be seen that this undermines the Belfast Agreement. One of Labour's biggest achievements that they herald to us all was the Belfast Agreement and the fact that it brought about peace in Northern Ireland. This fundamentally undermines one of the most important pillars of that agreement. We work on a consensus government, and there is no consensus from unionism around the protocol and the implementation of it. So therefore, this is putting the entire Belfast Agreement in jeopardy and is causing major problems for unionist people in Northern Ireland. And setting aside even that, the cost of living, the cost of bringing goods from GB to Northern Ireland, we've had the Road Haulage Association in recent days saying that it has increased the cost by 34%. That is impacting people on a daily basis. We need this resolved. We need to see the legislation. We need to see the legislation enacted, because we're a long way off that. And ultimately, we need unionism to be content with that legislation.
Well, I suppose we don't have long to wait to see exactly what will be within that legislation and how the EU and potentially the Republic of Ireland will react as well, not least to say the United States of America. Next week will certainly be interesting, but for now, Carla Lockhart, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing to talk through that very important issue. Moving on now, the Home Office is due to fly 130 migrants to Rwanda next Tuesday, that is, despite the High Court action trying to block the move. The Public and Commercial Services Union Care for Calais and Detention Action have issued judicial review proceedings challenging what they describe as, quote, unlawful policy by Home Secretary Priti Patel to remove those asylum seekers to the East African nation. Lawyers for more than 90 migrants have now submitted legal challenges asking to stay in the United Kingdom. Well, let's bring in the former editor of The Sun newspaper, Kelvin Mackenzie, to talk through exactly what's going on. The government insisting that this plane will fly on Tuesday. Are they right?
Well, they're right to try it. They're right to PR it. Unfortunately, it looks as though the lawyers will win the day. And because the judiciary is not like in America, where you have right and left, and currently right run the judiciary in the Supreme Court in the United States. Over here, a collection of liberal, wokish, Islington-based kind of judges always bow down to the people with their handouts from the legal profession, the lawyers acting on behalf of the illegal channel migrants. So I doubt whether it'll go next Tuesday. I'm very hopeful it's going to go some stage, since I don't see from anybody, apart from those with a committed kind of charitable cause to their view, anybody in this country who wants another 28,000 people just washing up on the beaches of the south coast of the United Kingdom. It's a scandal, and if we're not going to draw the line at 28,000, what does that become? If you look at the makeup of the migrants, they are predominantly Afghan, then they're Iranians, then they're Iraqis. Well, there's tens of millions in those countries who would give their eye teeth to get into the universal credit system that exists in this country. After all, under Boris now, they're going to be able to take our taxpayers' money and buy houses, if that's at all possible. It's not possible in the Surrey area, and I'm not quite sure where it would be possible in the rest of the country. But the whole thing is utterly preposterous. I mean, it's costing us $2 million a week to house everybody around the country right now that is coming abroad at Dover and other ports. The thing is shocking, and it is painful to watch the judicial system being tortured in this way.
It's interesting to see how activist lawyers have become in recent years, really, almost radicalised by the process of the Brexit referendum. There's going to be a crunch point, surely, coming relatively soon. We hear that the Attorney General, Suella Braverman, is really working hard in this area. Is it time the government takes on lawyers rather than issue by issue, the system as a whole, as to whether or not we have sort of legislating from the bench, as has been growing in this country?
Yeah, everybody likes a bit of power, don't they? And I understand it. But can I just say about whoever the Attorney General is or whoever the Solicitor General is, they've had the opportunity now. The Tories have been in power now since you were at school, actually, since 2012, right? And they haven't done anything in a decade. So what makes you think they're going to do something about it now? And of course, then you get all the judiciary, we're being robbed of our power and all the rest of it. I mean, while they're at it, while they're dealing with that, why don't we have a system which could outlaw the railway strikes, for instance? Why is it almost uniquely across Europe? And I understand even in India it's banned, right? How are we allowed to have a trade union who decides you're not going to travel anywhere that you want to travel ever, at any time we decide to have a strike? So the Rwanda situation would be a good example of trying to clamp down on this. But hold on a second. Jesse Norman, former former Treasury Minister and now massively hostile to Boris. He is hostile to the Rwanda situation. I'm not even sure the Conservatives are even conservative on the Rwandan issue. It's astonishing. The only good news we have, and were Boris to fall under the bus, I know she's not going to get it, as at least Priti Patel manages to proselytize the idea that we cannot continue to allow tens of thousands, even hundreds, by the way, into our country. We haven't got enough housing right now to house the people within the UK. What makes you think you can have another 30, 40, 50, 60, 100,000 a year just coming in, immediately going on universal credit and immediately demanding that they have housing?
Well,
and
Kelvin McKenzie.
Also want food, also want this, want that. Who is going to deal with this situation? You can't
Certainly
believe that. You can't
one,
believe that
and I
Starmer's
suppose
going to do
your
it. He's
argument
wandering
there
around
that the
Ireland.
Home Secretary is someone who cares about this issue immensely. I suppose the question turns to whether or not her department cares as much as she does. But I'm afraid we've run to the end of that conversation. Kelvin, thank you so much for joining us. We must move on before the end of the programme. Thanks again. Well, the Prime Minister was voted against by 148 of his own MPs in the confidence vote on Monday night. And one of the factions to come out against him was the right of his party, including the likes of Andrew Bridgen, Steve Baker and others. But in a bid to win back their support, the Prime Minister is said to be planning to publish legislation that the EU warned even could risk a trade war as he looks to placate some of those Brexit-backing rebels. Well, let's turn now to the political editor of The Express Online, David Maddox, who joins us in the studio.
Hi, Tom.
This legislation that we're expecting next week, it's going to be a bit of a bombshell.
It is, but we've had due warning of it, as has the EU, and really, actually, the EU are largely at fault with this because they've been delaying and pretending that they're willing to compromise on occasions, but not willing to compromise. And actually, things are coming to a head in Northern Ireland, and frankly, a lot of us are surprised that it's been delayed so long.
Well, the government is saying that it is in parallel continuing these negotiations, these negotiations that have been stretching on for over a year now, I believe, with the European Union. Does this legislation, in your mind, will it actually ever come to pass, or is this actually in and of itself a bit of a negotiation tactic?
I think that's still a big question mark, and I still think that they're trying to use it more as a threat than a reality. But, you know, if the impasse continues, then actually they may find themselves with the legislation whether they want it or not. The question is whether it will actually work, whether it's enough. I mean, a lot of the MPs would just like them to trigger Article 16, as the EU have already done. At least
briefly, and then retracted.
Yes, they made absolute fools of themselves. But you know, that's the simplest way, and you can even trigger it in a way that doesn't affect everything. You know, so it could be targeted.
I suppose the European Union really made a bit of this mess for themselves when, in order to block vaccine imports, they decided to, for a few hours at the very least, trigger that article. Do they understand the severity of this situation and the risk it's putting to the Good Friday Belfast Agreement?
So the feedback we're getting is that the EU really have devolved this issue to Ireland and accept the Irish government's perspective on it, and that's it. And the Irish government, for some reason or another, actually like the protocol. I don't know, I can't imagine why, but so they're going to stick with it. They think it's fine, they think there's no need for change, but clearly, you know, they can't form a Northern Irish Assembly executive anymore. You know, the peace process is in trouble. And, you know, there's a serious danger of shelves going empty because it can't come across the Irish Sea. So, you know, the government's got to do with it. And, you know, and this is a good moment for Boris, after, you know, taking a bit of a beating on Monday, to show that, you know, he's in charge again.
Fireworks next week, potentially. Well, David Maddox, thank you so much for joining us in the studio and talking through what will be, no doubt, a contentious issue next week. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. I'll be back tomorrow at both 9:30 and indeed midday for a special 2-hour show. Coming up next, it's Colin Brazier.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. It's been a warm and bright day so far in the east, but cloudier skies have affected western areas with rain for some, but the rain not terribly heavy at the moment. The weather front bringing the rain in from the west is a fairly weak feature, but it is attached to an area of low pressure that is unseasonably deep, and that will provide the focus for increasingly strong winds during Friday and Saturday. But ahead of those winds, well, we've got cloud and rain moving east overnight. The rain really petering out by the time it gets to eastern England, eastern Scotland, just a few light showers in places and 1 or 2 showers continuing in the south and the far northwest overnight, but otherwise plenty of clear skies in between. And despite the clear skies, actually the breeze will be picking up through the night, so 14 to 16 Celsius by dawn on Friday in the south, 10 to 13 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. And a bright start for many. There will be some sunshine first thing, but quite quickly the cloud will build. That cloud will give the odd shower over Wales, northern and western England, but the most frequent and heaviest downpours will affect Scotland and Northern Ireland. Here we'll also see the strongest winds, so that will make it feel cool. Mid-teens for the west of Scotland, but still the potential for 24 Celsius towards the southeast, although it will be fairly breezy for all of us. And that wind reaching gale force around exposed coasts of western Scotland, and here we'll also see some more prolonged rain move in during Friday night and the first part of Saturday. Showers easing elsewhere, still 1 or 2 in the west, but clear skies for the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. However, again, because of the breeze, temperatures will hold up in the teens in many spots. So a blustery start to Saturday, that wind bouncing over the hills of Wales, northern England to give a gusty day, and there'll be further showers here. There'll also be frequent showers continuing for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and again that wind making it feel cool with gales around exposed western coasts.